So good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 11 of the Civils Daily Initiative of Daily Answer Wars and Daily Answer War Prime. So actually, I could not take the session yesterday because I was ill a bit. Uh, right now, I'm recovering and I'll be able to take it properly from tomorrow, I guess. So today also I had to delay the session a bit, but still, we had given you a question in the morning, and we will try to discuss that question in this session and also look at some of the copies that you have submitted in the Telegram group before 2 p.m. So the question was again a PYQ from UPSC GS paper 2 for 2022, and this question was, I will say, a bit difficult because a lot of facts needed to be understood and kept by heart to answer this in a proper way, and also the question asked about Supreme Court judgments and all. So it was like writing a lot of things, packing a lot of content in the 15 marks. But we will proceed and see how and what all we could have written in the answer, how we could have included the case laws and all. Good evening, Harji. Good evening, Nisha. So the question today was like discuss the procedures to decide the disputes arising out of the election of a member of the parliament or state legislature under the representation of the People Act 1951. Now RPA Act 1951 was enacted, and under that procedures to decide the disputes arising out of election of members of parliament, that is MP, and the state legislature, that is MLA. Both are given. So according to that RP Act, you had to talk about the procedures to decide the dispute. After this was the first part of the question. After that, you had to talk about the grounds on which the election of any candidate who has been elected or any returned candidate. By any returned candidate, we mean that the person has been elected. So, what are the grounds on which the election of any returned candidate may be declared void? So, after election, how can a candidate's election be declared void? So, some of the grounds, for example, this was a bit easy because we all of us know about some of the constitutional provisions also, and also about anti-defection law. So if you knew about these two things also, you could have written decently. You could have addressed this part properly, even if you did not know the RPA Act or did not remember it at that point of time. This was from basic constitutional provisions only. So after that, what remedy is available to the aggrieved party against the decision? So after uh, election being declared void, so there are some remedies for the party which has aggrieved party or the person whose election has been declared void. So what are the remedies available to him? You had to answer that too. So this was the third part of the answer. Next is refer to the case laws. So this is also mentioned in the question itself. So it was necessary to mention some of the important court cases or the Supreme Court cases that have been in the news, or you remembered in each of these parts, or you could have just mentioned one each in each part, or even together you could have mentioned 2 3 cases by giving a subheading called various case laws. So that approach could have also been taken. Either you could have mentioned it separately, giving a subsection, or you could have integrated the case laws along with the answer that you are writing. Like in each part, you could have mentioned one or two case related to that particular issue. So we will see and look at what are the procedures and all. So basically, again we will go with the same format, that is introduction, then the body, and then the conclusion part. And this was a 15 marker, so all of these parts were expected to be written in a bit of detail. Although, like the answer that you will be about to see or you are going to see might have some more details. You were not needed to write all of that, but still you can take a cue from this answer and understand that what are the important points that could have been mentioned in your answer. So we start with introduction. So in the introduction, we talk about constitutional article of 327. So this article basically empowers the parliament to enact laws for the election procedures, and under this power only the parliament has enacted this representation of People's Act RP Act 1951. So I have just given the context of RPA Act 1951 itself. Uh, because of two reasons. First, constitutional articles are also mentioned. I could relate it to the constitution, and also this was an easy introduction to write because talking about RPA in itself is a bit difficult. But since we have good enough knowledge of constitution, or we have read Lakshmikant multiple times, or we remember these articles pretty easily, so I have tried to integrate it in this answer so that the introduction for you guys can be a bit easy. So the Constitution empowers Parliament under Article 327 to enact laws for the election procedures. This led to enactment of RPA Act 1951 for the conduct, disqualification, and qualification of members along with corrupt practices and electoral offences. Now, some of you have also written the provisions of RPA Act, but that was not asked. Like you can mention in short bullet points, but I think briefly this was also a decent way to write. I have included most of the provisions of the RPA Act, like the broad provisions, what this act is concerned with. That could have been mentioned, and that is enough. After that, you don't need to write like in detail about RPA Act, as some of you have done. So that could have been avoided. Next, we move on to address the first part of the question, that is procedure to decide election disputes with regards to MP MLA. So this was the first part. I have taken the subheading as it is, procedures to decide the disputes arising out of election of MP MLA under RPA Act 1951. So you can see that I have just picked up the subheading from the question itself. Now this is a procedure, this is an like process that you should adopt in your answers, because most of you guys I think get uh, try to innovate there, but that is not required. What that leads to is like different points, like you go along a different way and some of the important points are missed. So to stick to the point, it is important to take subheadings from the question itself. After like you decide that this is subheading, you can frame it in some other way, that is not an issue, but you should try to stick to the question as much as possible. So this is the second first part of the answer, body of the answer basically. So, what are the procedures to decide election disputes? In this, we first talk about election petition. So, for the election disputes arising out of an MP or MLA, election petition needs to be submitted to the High Court of a particular state jurisdiction. So, to the state High Court concerned, the election petition needs to be submitted. So, this is the first step. So, we go in a stepwise matter and see that what is the whole procedure. So, we do not like election petition is not directly submitted to Supreme Court. Even in the case of MP election, the petition needs to be submitted to the particular high court, particular state high court. So after that, there is a time limit for that election petition. Any elector or any other candidate can file the election petition within 45 days from the date of election of the elected member. So this 45 days is the time limit. So if you are able to include these points, this will definitely give you some extra marks, because this shows that you have read the whole act in quite detail. After that, we go to talk about High Court trial. Expeditious High Court trial. High Court expeditiously provides trial in such election disputes within 6 months. So 6 months is again the time limit from the date of filing election petition, for which the High Court is expected to conduct the trial. After that, the High Court gives the order. If the High Court upholds the election petition, the elected person stands disqualified and the election is termed as void. So this is the procedure basically. But again, after this, appeal can be done to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court comes in here, and the aggrieved legislator can appeal to the Supreme Court over the decision of the High Court. But again, there is a time limit, that is after 30 days, like within 30 days from the High Court order, you need to appeal to the Supreme Court. So this is basically the procedure, or you can say one innovation that you could have done here is you could have drawn a flow chart. This is a pretty ideal uh, like answer where flow chart can be drawn, because each step follows the other step, and simply by giving arrow marks, you could have just mentioned these broad points, and that would have been sufficient, I guess, and just mention the important dates in the brackets. So that could have been enough. You need not write the whole explanation after each point. Next, we move on to the second part of the question, that is grounds on which election of any returned candidate may be declared void. So this was the second part, and now as I told you, this part was comparatively easy because there are some constitutional provisions and some anti-defection law provisions. So if you knew these 2 points, I think you could have sufficiently written it. But let us see what all we could have added in this part. So constitutional provisions are Articles 102 and 191. Again, writing articles will give you some marks, but you need not to fret over that if you are missing one or two articles, that a lot of marks will be deducted. That is also not the case. If you can just mention that Constitution also provides for disqualification, I think the examiner will consider that. So Articles 108 and 191 provides for Parliament for disqualification of a legislator of Parliament and state legislator respectively on the grounds of holding office of profit, and related to the RPA Act itself could have been mentioned. For example, this corrupt practice. So if any corrupt practice has been committed by the returned candidate or his election agent. So returned candidate means the candidate who has been elected. So if any corrupt practice was there, he can be removed. Now here the case was adjudicated by the Supreme Court, Abhiram Singh versus E.D. Komachin case. I understand that this is a difficult case to remember, but try to note it down and try to remember this in your future answers. Even if you could have written corrupt practice here, that would have been sufficient. And if this case, the guys who have written this case will definitely get some extra marks. So from now onwards, try to note some of the important cases related to the polity topics. Like most of the important polity topics have two or three judicial cases. So whenever you go through in the newspaper go through the newspaper and you get those cases, try to note it down in your fact book. So, for example, in Aviram Singh versus E.D. Komachan case, the promotion of feelings of enmity or hatred between different classes of the citizens of India on grounds of religion, race, caste, and community was considered unconstitutional. So, this is also a provision for disqualification. Like election can of any returned candidate can be declared void if he is found to be elected through use of corrupt practice. Next is about voluntary giving up. So next again, this is from the anti-defection laws. So these are the same very points which I have tried to enlarge or illustrate upon. So legislator voluntarily giving up the party membership or abstaining from vote or voting against the directions of the party whip. So this simply means that the elected candidate does not want to remain in the party, and that is considered as voluntarily giving up, and this also disqualifies him. Next is nominated members. So nominated members can join any political party within 6 months, and after that they can't do so. In any time lapse after that leads to disqualification. Next, independent members, independent legislators joining any political party qualifies for disqualification in the 10th schedule. So again, independent members cannot join any political party as they have been elected on an independent ticket. So if they join any party, they will be considered disqualified under 10th schedule. So all of these provisions can be written pretty easily because of the anti-defection laws that we have studied in detail. Now, conviction for offense. So this case is pretty famous, and I think all of you must have somewhere about it, read somewhere about it, and you must have written this if you are attempting this paper. If an elected candidate is convicted for an offense for more than 2 years, his election is declared void on the same day as per the judgment in Lily Thomas case. So whenever elected candidate is after a proper trial is convicted and the offense convicted for an offense and that is more than 2 years, so he or she automatically gets disqualified. So this judgment was done by Supreme Court in this Lily Thomas case. So you could have mentioned this also. So this was the second part basically. Next we can go on to talk about the remedy available to the aggrieved person against the decision of election being turned void. So again there are pretty much remedies available. So most of the election we saw was getting void because of anti-defection law. So first we will talk about that only. So speaker's decision, the decision over disqualification under defections rests with the speaker. All of us know about this. So if speaker's position is vacant, it rests with the deputy speaker. So in previous earlier times, before this case, basically, this is also a very famous case, Kyoto Holohan versus Jachilu case. So this case basically gave the power of judicial review to the court. Like the Supreme Court the speaker cannot arbitrarily disqualify an elected representative. So the speaker's decision came under judicial review in this case. Earlier, it was not under judicial review, and the speaker's decision was final. So this remedy became available after this case. So you needed to mention this case here. Now, aggrieved person can reach judiciary. So the disqualified persons can directly reach the judiciary and the Election Commission of India. Supreme Court orders. Supreme Court provides orders for the aggrieved legislators who are disqualified. So again, Supreme Court after the trial provides the final orders. And in SR Mumbai versus Union of India case, again a pretty famous case, Supreme Court mentioned that the defections of a political party must be decided in the legislature through a floor test. So Supreme Court decided to do the process of floor test, and whenever such mass defections happen, a floor test is usually done. Like recently also we saw in Maharashtra. So after that, the Supreme Court decision is final, and upon floor test by the governor, the majority is offered state legislature powers. So whichever majority is found, that majority is asked to form the government after the floor test. So this is basically what are the remedies available in case of the election being declared void. So again, here you could have drawn a smart art format, like gone through a flowchart or some diagram and mentioned the important cases. Kyoto Holohan and SR Mumbai both are very important cases and very famous ones also. So, and if a serious UPSC aspirant is expected to know about these cases, and you must have read about it somewhere or the other, so you could have mentioned these cases pretty easily. So after this, I have concluded the answer, and in conclusion, I have tried to keep a like positive conclusion, but it was not necessary to keep a positive conclusion. Let us first see what I have written. Election is the biggest festival of the religion of democracy, and India, being one of the most populous countries in the world, has upheld the democratic spirit due to the established election process. So as we see, like in most of the countries that became free along the time India became free, democracy is on decline. Like most of the countries, there are civil wars, and there are many types of issues. Like military coup happens. Recently, we saw in Myanmar and many African countries. But India is one of the bright shining lights of democracy, considered by most people around the country, around the world. So I have tried to uh, portray a positive picture that due to such acts and such rules, election is happening pretty regularly and pretty religiously, and that has helped us to keep our democratic spirit alive. So that you could have mentioned in the conclusion. Alternatively, another conclusion which you could also mention is about the need of tribunals. Now there is an issue that even after so much procedures and so much of lengthy legislations and Supreme Court decisions, there have been allegations that the process of deciding qualification and disqualification matters of elected representatives is not very fast in India. Like it takes a lot of time. Sometimes the court sits on it, sometimes the speaker sits on his decision. So there has been an voice rising about the need of special tribunals to decide these cases. So you can mention here that even after so much legislations and laws, the qualification and disqualification issues of elected members of the Indian Parliament and state legislatures remain a cause of concern, and hence we can go for establishing tribunals specifically for this purpose, for deciding such cases. So you can mention the need of tribunals. Alternatively, if you wanted to mention some different type of conclusion or some give some extra, try to integrate some way forward in your conclusion. Otherwise, you could positively just talk about election process, because India is one of the shining bright lights of democracy, and that would have also that would also have sufficed. So I think basically you understood the what was the basic framework of the answer. This was a pretty theoretical answer. Like you had to remember the RPA Act, the main provisions, what is the procedure of disqualification. Then also you have to remember how can an elected representative be turned election of an elected representative be turned void. And next you should have also remembered the process about, like when due to anti-defection law or something, an elected representative is disqualified, what are the remedies available to him, whether he can go to Supreme Court or not, whether the speaker's decision is under judicial review or not. So backed by Supreme Court cases, you should have mentioned all of that, and I think that should have been a sufficient answer. So basically, three parts were quite compulsory in this answer. The first part was this one, procedure to decide election disputes. So in this, you have to start with High Court and finally end with Supreme Court. So this is a pretty easy one. You can remember this and just draw a flowchart to make it quite easy. After that, next part was about grounds on which election of any returned candidate will be declared void. This was the second part. Here you could have talked about anti-defection, corrupt practices, and constitutional provisions. These three were the main pillars. So you could have framed your answer around these 3 points. And after that, the last part was about the remedy available. Here also, you could have talked about some important cases such as Kyoto Holohan and this SR Mumbai, and what all remedies are available, like flow test and all. You could have mentioned like in pretty passing your passing arguments. So that is the question discussion for today, I guess. And next we will move to looking at some of the copies that you have submitted before 2 p.m. So first is Ritu's copy. Elections are the temple of democracy. Therefore, provisions under Constitution and Article 81, 170, 131 are created to fix number of seats, method of filling seat, and parliamentary laws under RPA Act elaborate on free and fair elections. Okay, but best could have been if you could have mentioned Article 327, that is under which the RPA Act was enacted. Because this is fine, but the question is not talking wholly about elections, but still it will work because you have mentioned some of the constitutional articles. But it would have been better if you could have mentioned 327. Once the election results are declared, the role of ECI ends. Any disputes arising of elections are dealt by HC of respective constituency. Fine. Reviewing power of High Court petition by voter candidate within 45 days. So here go for subheading. Try to mention all the three parts with different subheadings. That will increase the visibility of your answer. So this is good. Like you have mentioned, 45 days. RPA Act and guidelines to resolve 6 months. This is also good. Section 100 of the employer ground for declaring election void via 102 Constitution. Okay, so this is the second part, I guess. So you are first talking about RPA Act. Okay, unsound mind. So this is under Constitution. So here you can omit uh, talking about Section 100 of the RPA Act. You can just mention that grounds for declaring election void, and after that you can go for first talking about Constitution, then talking about corrupt practices. This is also good. Indira Gandhi versus Andhra case will also be fine here. Improper acceptance and rejection of nomination papers. ठीक है. Malpractice in counting process. CP Joshi has declared result. Okay. Non-compliance with constitutional provisions. So malpractice in counting process is fine, but this is like an allegation on the election commission. So not basically due to the issues with the elected members. So just go for talking about some of the grounds on which the elected member, due to his issues, he is disqualified. So you can this first 2 3 points are good, like under constitution and under the corrupt practices of RP Act. So here you can talk about anti-defection law, I guess. Let us see whether you have mentioned it or not. No, you have not mentioned. So you could have talked about anti-defection law, like due to defection or like voluntarily for nominated members, independent candidates. What are the provisions you could have mentioned, and those are also the grounds on which the election can be declared void. So remedy available to the aggrieved party against the decision. Aggrieved party can file a review petition, stay order in Supreme Court as an appeal. Okay, he can declare fresh elections. HC can declare fresh elections on new candidates winner. Okay, reformatory measures by parliament or state legislatures can be taken, like fast tracking the case for a coup. Okay, so again, I think that anti-defection dimension is missing. Therefore, in this part also, it looks incomplete. So basically, the third point is a way forward, and like this point is basically a way forward. Stay order is fine, and this is also about HC. HC can declare fresh election. High Court. The question is not asking what the court can do. So the question is asking what are the remedies available with the agreed party when his election is declared void. So whenever speaker disqualifies an agreed party, so he can argue for judicial review of the speaker's decision, and then Supreme Court will start the process of judicial review and all. So you can mention those things. I think you have missed that dimension. So if you can add that, this answer will be complete. Otherwise, most of the other things in this answer are fine. Elections should be fair and free of malpractices. That's the basic structure of the constitution. Therefore, every step to be taken to provide transparency, rule of law, and the same to uphold the post. So, okay, conclusion is decent. I think also you have taken a positive view, so that is fine. And this point can act as a way forward also. So you can simply give the subheading way forward and write this. Try to draw some diagram or write it in some smart art format, and that will be better. So overall, I think you will get 5 out of 15 for this answer. Into basically because of missing writing about anti-defection law. So next we move to Pooja's copy. Because the Edition of People Act 1951 provides for the conduct of elections. This act also is okay. So okay, Pooja, here you could have just mentioned Article 327 of the Constitution that could have given a background to the RPA Act, like how under what provisions of the Constitution the Parliament has enacted the RPA Act that could have been established if you could have mentioned Article 327. Next is procedure to decide election disputes. Filing an election petition inquiring the validity of parliamentary local government elections results. So local government you can avoid because the question is itself asking about state legislature or the parliament. So MP MLA की बात हो रही है. So you can just talk about MP and MLA. The petitions are filed in the respective high court by any candidate or elector. Okay. Election petition calling in question and elections shall be filed. Okay. So I think this process is incomplete here. So here after third point, you can talk about go for the full process procedure to decide. So this is not that whether it can be filed in HC, High Court or Supreme Court. The question is about what is the whole procedure to decide. So after this, you can talk about the Supreme Court, High Court does a trial, and it is like it is mandatory for the High Court to decide the case within 6 months. After that, within that order, 30 days, within 30 days of that order, the agreed party can go to the Supreme Court for an appeal. So you can mention that also. Grounds on which election of candidate declared void if HC appoints them on the date of his or election return candidate was not disqualified, was disqualified to choose to fill the seat. Next is any corrupt practice has been committed by a. So again, this subheading also you can just remove if HC opines that because latter in the latter part of this subsection, we have talked about other things also. To remove this HCO points, that grounds on which election of candidate declared void, and this is sufficient, I guess. After that, go on to talk about uh, all the practices like constitutional processes, then corrupt practices under RPA Act, and then the anti-defection law. So all of those three things you can talk about. Corrupt practice is fine. There was an improper acceptance of any nomination. There has been any improper acceptance, refusal, or rejection of any vote of the. Okay, there has been any non-compliance with the provision of the Constitution or RPA. So these are fine, but I think again you are trying to innovate points here. Like these are some generic, very generic points. You are talking about like non-compliance, and also that is pretty obvious. If someone is elected with uh, by non-compliance, in the first place he won't be elected itself, because the election commission will stop it in the tracks whenever he is non-compliant. So corrupt practice is fine. After that, you can talk about defection laws and the constitutional provisions of mentioned under Article 102 and Article 191 of the Constitution. So have a read of those provisions, and I think you will get the decent content for this part. Remedies available to the agreed parties. So agreed party can file an appeal to the Supreme Court within 30 years. So this is fine. An application for stay of HC can go to the High Court. Supreme Court can also put a stay on the operation of the order made by High Court based on the agreed party's appeal. Okay. Just mentioning the case will do. Like you need not explain the case. Just try to go for mentioning more cases. For example, you can talk about SR Mumbai when Kyoto Holoan, when Speaker's decision was turned to be eligible under judicial review. So those cases will improve your answer. So try to include more cases rather than going for explanation of the case. In the Azhar Hussain versus Rajiv Gandhi case, the election petition by Azhar Hussain was dismissed by the High Court and Supreme Court due to lack of evidence substantiating the allegation of corrupt practices by. Okay, so this is fine. If corrupt practices will be not there, the candidate will not be disqualified. So when you are talking about corrupt practices in the first instance, for example, here you can mention here itself that case. Otherwise, it just is a repetition of that. No, nothing new has been added by mentioning this case. So you can mention it there and go for some other cases that I have mentioned in the model answer here. So I will share that answer with you, Pooja. You can just have a look at it and work upon your content a bit. Thus, the representation of people of 1951 is crucial for the efficient functioning of Indian democracy, as it enables the conduct of streamlined elections and provides the necessary redressal mechanism. ठीक है ये भी decent conclusion, like you have just given a good picture of RPA Act 1951, but it is not actually very good. Like there have been many allegations about like malpractices and decisions of disqualification being delayed. So if you are talking about RPA Act, go for talking about need of tribunals and all, like separate election tribunals to decide the cases in a rapid manner. Otherwise, go for talking about elections being a good thing in a democracy, and India has been quite successful in conducting elections and electing representatives through elections. So you can just avoid talking about RPA in the conclusion and mention about elections as a whole. So that will be better. Out of these, either choose one out of these. So overall, I think you will get 4 out of 15 for this answer, Pooja. Basically, because content can be improved a bit. Most parts of the content are generic, and you have just repeated the same thing via case laws also. So try to include more dimensions in your answer. I'll be sharing the model answer, and you can just add it to your word notes and try to improve upon the content when such questions or questions related to RPA Act comes next time. Uh, Next, let us move to Sahiba's copy. The RPA Act 1951 was passed by the Parliament in accordance with Article 3. Okay, so this is good. This Act makes provision. So yeah, I was talking about this, that many of you have just in bullet points talked about the uh, details about RPA Act. So not required. You can just talk about conduct of election. Just use commas and finish it under one line. Next, procedure to decide the disputes is fine. Presentation of election petitions to High Court. Jurisdiction lies with the High Court. Okay, election petitions by the provision. Led presentation petitions by candidates. Election. Okay, trial of election petitions. Procedure before the High Court applicable under Code of. Okay, the decision of the High Court is declaring the election. Okay, and we declare void if the High Court believes the candidate was involved in the offence of bribery. Okay, Protection of Civil Rights Act. Offence relating to the offence. So I think you have integrated all parts of the answer, Sahiba. What you can do is like you have gotten into quite detail. Like every small thing you have written, made a point and written it, but still it is fine. But when you are talking about procedure, no, just complete the procedure first. Uh, when like after this point, decision of the High Court, you can just go ki decision of the High Court is made within 6 months, and after that, the agreed party can, if he wants, he can go to the Supreme Court for appeal after within 30 days of that decision. So that can be mentioned, and after that, go for talking about grounds on which the election is considered void. Because questioner also asked both these sections separately, so there is no harm in going for answering separately each part. So then you can talk about the provisions under RPA Act, or like what are the provisions for disqualification. There you can mention these things, and then go for talking about the constitutional as well as anti-defection provisions. Remedy to the so you have written it in quite detail. That is good, but I think try to include all the dimensions, both the RP, because the question does not limit there when the second part, it does not limit itself to the RP Act. In the first part, it limits itself to the RP Act, but in the second part, it does not mention it. So you can mention all the three ways of disqualification and try to keep this section a bit small. No need to mention all these sections in details, because I don't think you will be able to remember this in the exam hall. If you are able, so that is well and good, then you can mention it, no issues, but try to include all the dimensions rather than explaining one dimension in quite detail. So after that, you have gone for talking about the remedy to the agreed party appeals to Supreme Court. This is fine. Disqualification later will be decided by President in case of okay. President and Governor will act as per the okay. The Election Commission has been given power of civil court. The Election Commission may also, for reasons to be recorded, remove any disqualification. So okay, these are good. Again, in this also you can just mention some of the other provisions also, like related to the speaker and all. So that will be make the answer holistic. And case laws, again, you have mentioned it in different under different subheading. I will say that it is better if you can integrate it, but otherwise also let us see promotion of feelings of enmity or hatred. So, okay, this you can mention under corrupt practices. For example, when you have written such a long for this part, long explanation for this part, here you can mention that case quite easily. So you can just try to do that. Next is Lily Thomas. So this is also good. Here also the Parliament, the Election Commission basically. Available. Okay. So here also, like when the elected person is convicted, so he gets disqualified. So this again you can mention in like grounds on which he can be disqualified. Then Chokidari, other okay, this is also fine. The RPA 1951 is essential for the efficient functioning of the Indian democracy. It provides a critical redressal mechanism. Okay, so conclusion is again good. Again, you can go for the alternative one also, or keep the conclusion more broad as you wish. And this is also a decent conclusion. So overall, since your content is quite rich, you will get 4 out of 4.5 out of 15. But I think you can arrange your points better and also try to be more holistic by including the provisions other than the RPA Act also. That will improve the like dimensions in your answer. Like you can talk about the constitutional and anti-defection provisions also. So that will be it for today, guys. Again, I'll meet tomorrow and try to discuss the question that was given yesterday in tomorrow's session. I was not feeling well, so I decided to discuss only one question today. That is the one that was given today. I will try to discuss yesterday question about BIMSTEC and SARC in tomorrow's session, and also try to show you some good copies for yesterday. And again, tomorrow again, we'll be giving a question in the morning, and as usual, in the evening, we'll have the evaluation and feedback session. And also, if you want like detailed reviews, like yesterday, I gave some detailed reviews in the group. So if you want such type of detailed reviews and also mentorship support, you can just join the CD Warzone Prime initiative, and we will also be motivated with that and try to improve your answer writing to a level where you can't get less marks than minimum 120 or 115 in GS papers like 1, 2, 3. So we will try to improve you to such a level. So that will be it for today, guys. Again, we will meet tomorrow in the evening with the evaluation and feedback session. Do join and do keep answer writing and try to do the peer reviews also, the Telegram group. Thank you very much. Meet again.